Next is Joernchen, who is going to tell us about Ruby on Rails security. Thank you very much to be here early, that is before 12, which is so early for today.
Hi, so let's talk a bit about Ruby on Rails. This is just an attempt to share my experience when I was reading some Rails applications. The things which I came up with are mostly known, but not, I guess, too widely because Ruby on Rails is, I have a problem auditing applications with it to find actually used open source applications, because most of it, like Twitter or Xing, is closed source, but also built in Rails. So we will walk through a bit of code, how it is. First of all, how do you build an application with it, and then what are the security aspects you have to take care of. We'll have examples from Redmine, which is an open source project management software, which can have an issue tracker and a repository for source code and all that fancy stuff you need for your project. And the CCC-MS, which is the website of the KSC in Germany, which is also based on Rails, the new version. And I got another example where the vendor did not get bug, so I will show this bug, but I won't tell you what it was. With a bit of Google code search, you might find out. So as a short disclaimer, I'm not a coder, so don't expect a full-blown introduction to Ruby and Rails, rather my thoughts on how to read and understand it. So what is Ruby on Rails? If we listen to the website, it says Ruby on Rails is an open source web framework that's optimized for programmer happiness and sustainable productivity. It lets you write beautiful code by favoring convention over configuration. Yeah, enough bullshit. Current version is 3.05. It's a model view controller-based web application framework written in Ruby. So basically, model view controller means software architecture style where you isolate different objectives of the software into different software parts. So you have the model, which handles the data of the application and state changes of the data, and you have the view for the UI basically, and controller, which does the I/O and the application and business logic of your model. So how does this look? First of all, the most important part to read when you look at Ruby on Rails code is the controller, because they do all the logic, and if you're looking for logic flaws, you will most likely find them there. Here we got just the declaration of the class, post controller, which inherits from action controller base, which is the base controller class for Ruby on Rails applications, and we define a method like show. This should be an example of a weblog or something, where you put in the variable at post, which is searched with the parameter ID. So params always denote something which comes from the outside, which is called ID. I will come to that later, how this is made up. But then we respond to the format and give the control over to the view. But before we come to the view, let's first look at the model. So this inherits class, the user of our weblog would inherit from active record base. So this is basically a database model where you have relationships between different classes, and you can also have auto verification. For instance, verifies presence of names. The user has to have a name, and it also verifies the uniqueness of a name. So the username can be taken only once. That's what Rails takes care for you automatically. So the view, which then renders your output to the user, is typically written in ERB. It's a mixture of HTML and Ruby. So we got here some HTML tags, and the tags with the % sign are Ruby code. which you can directly mix up. And when you have a percent sign and an equal sign, what comes out of this statement here would be directly put back to the user. So if you're looking for cross-site scripting in a Rails application, you at first might want to have a look at the views. So this looks rather shiny. So now we come to the part of reading the code and somehow extending the functionality of a Rails web application. From my point of view, it tends to be easily readable because it's very, just my opinion, it's a nicely readable language, and Ruby on Rails does very much the same. So you have all those statements which explain what they do by being the statement itself. So validates uniqueness of name. Says everything about it. It validates that the name is unique. If you read the code, you have at least 3 layers, which you all have to cover in order to be complete with your code audit. So you have the model, the viewer, the controller. They all are somehow connected together. And you also might have libraries, helpers, and other stuff which is plugged in there, which you should have a look at because most of the bugs I found were somewhere buried in the libraries, so that might be worth to look as well. And there might be checks for something where you don't expect them, and there might be bugs in something where you don't expect it. So the database backend could be SQLite, could be MySQL, could be Postgre, can be configured in at that part Rails app config database of YML. And migrations are used to describe this database tables. Those are described in Ruby again, and then migration into the database by a tool called Break. So this is how a migration looks like. This is an example from Redline. So it creates a table user with the column login, which is a string, might be 30 characters long, default isn't set, it might not be null. So all that is how you describe a table, and there's a place when you read the Rails application for to look at how does my model look like, which fields might I influence, which fields might I tamper with. So filters. This is again an example from Redline. Filters can be defined like this in line 4. We got a before filter which says require admin, except for show. Again, for my understanding, it's easily readable and understandable. So all methods defined as a user's controller require you to be administrator except the show method. This is how to understand it. So mainly they are the before filter, which hooks before the method is called, the after filter, which hooks after the method is called. Obviously, skip before filter, skip after filter do what they are named like. They skip certain filters for certain methods if you want to jump over them or do not execute them. And the round filter is something for catching exceptions and stuff like that. So user input. User input is, as I said before, params of something. This is a Ruby symbol. In the controller, for instance, will take the parameter something and will give up its value. So you post or get, we'll put it in a get variable with something equal to, that will give you params of something. If you have something bar, then it's posted like something with a edge bracket bar equal to. This is a Ruby on Rails way. You can even nest it much more to have a keyed hash to post into your Rails application, which will automatically be converted into a keyed hash in Ruby. Other ways to get user input in is which is automatically converted is when you post with content type text XML, you get user first name chunky would give you a user with first name chunky. If you post like JSON with content type application JSON, you would post user last name bacon would give you a user with the last name set to bacon. So basically that's an overview how those Rails applications work, how to get user input into it, and where to look at what. So now let's talk about what could go wrong. Some good old friends, the usual web application suspects are like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and cross-site request forgery. I'm going to talk a bit about those. So SQL injection is rarely found in Rails because Rails has lots of mechanisms to hide away all the SQL from you. If you have the typical search pattern, if you search for a user, you want to have user with the first name chunky and the last name bacon, it would be put like this. Instead of having here hard-coded values, you would put maybe variables there. And then it's all done with prepared statements, so you're pretty much safe from SQL injection. Anyways, if you find a construction like this, the typical string inlining, in this case, what this does, it evaluates parent's ID and the context of the string, and you again got a SQL injection, but unfortunately, at least with MySQL, I tested it, stack queries do not work, so not that huge fun with SQL injection in Rails. And as I said, it's rarely found, at least in the code I looked at. Cross-site scripting, yeah, this is a rather cheap example. We got our imaginary block Rails application, and in the views we see something like some variable out of a model directly rendered out, instead of with the H, which does all the HTML escaping. We would have like a cross-site scripting issue. Another way another look at are formatters for syntax highlighting and stuff like that, or like markdown highlighting and other highlighters and formatters, or just try to find it manually by entering your alert XSS in any field you came across, or use the scanner like WebTube, which I like a lot. That sounds a lot. Cross-site scripting for me isn't really an interesting bug, but I found some in Redmine, a persistent one. Just found it by messing around with the formatters for code highlighting. What's the problem in the syntax highlighter? And it looked like that, so that's why I didn't found it in code. I rather found it by messing around with it and then hunted down the code piece which was responsible for it. So here we got a match of, it was for source code highlighting, so we got a match on code and class something, and this match would be put into a list and later redisplayed and give you a persistent XSS, for example, in the Redmine wiki or issue tracker, where you could do code highlighting. So cross-site request forgery basically is mitigated by some Rails magic. It's called protect from forgery. So you got a controller, which is an application controller, which like protect from forgery everything except index. So basically what you get is an authentication token. We'll look at that a bit later. What you get is a token which is revalidated